I have a problem with the way that people apply scientific thinking. So, the essence of science is supposed to be that it is a method of inquiry to gain knowledge and to increase your understanding of the universe. And you do this by formulating an idea, formulating a model, and then testing to see if it holds up against observable reality. This is, in a nutshell, what the scientific method means, and what and all the results thereof are what we should consider to be scientific knowledge. However, I have noticed something else, which I think has historical reasons. And what I've noticed is that scientific thinking has a lot of dogmas. It has a lot of beliefs that are not necessarily proven, that do not necessarily have evidence behind them, which is what it's supposed to be when you are practicing scientific research. You should prove everything that you believe and say. And so they are dogmatic. And being dogmatic is being anti-science. And so in my opinion, a lot of the so-called scientific thinking is anti-scientific in our modern day and age. Now, these dogmas that I'm referring to are some examples are materialism, the belief that the absolute nature of reality is made out of solid matter. It is the belief in atheism, that's the second one, which is the belief that there is no conscious being that created the universe with intention. Instead, there is just the universe exists out of chance, meaninglessness, and it's just a spontaneous emergence out of nothing, with no intention behind it. Yeah, so, and I think there are more, but I'll keep it at these two. Because there is no proof for materialism. In fact, in our current day and age, we already know that matter, if you really start looking at it, it stops being really matter. Like, it's, you have quantum mechanics and it turns into waves and particles. It turns into a probability function instead of a solid piece of matter. And as for atheism, there is no proof of God, but there is also no non-proof of God. You cannot prove, at least no one has proven the existence of God, but no one has also disproven the existence of God. So, if you truly were thinking scientifically, you would not be atheistic, you would be agnostic, and you would not be materialistic either. I don't know what you would be then. I don't know what is the current best approximation of the nature of reality in terms of scientific thinking. Perhaps probabilistic or energistic, because we also know that, energy equals matter. E is mc squared. So Yeah, but I myself still see a lot of this materialistic and uh, atheistic beliefs going around in the pretense that this is scientific and that this is valid and that there's that all the evidence points to this. But no, there is no evidence that proves that materialism is the correct model for the nature of reality. But I do understand where these dogmas came from. They come from the Renaissance, the like between the ages between the time period of 1600 and 1800 in Europe, when science first started to become a thing, and until that time the Christian church was incredibly dominant, very oppressive, and very dogmatic. You had the Bible, you had your priest, your church, and they taught you what was true and what was false. And they claimed a sort of title of absolute authority on the truth because it was written in the Bible or not. And you were not supposed to argue with the divine creator. And as a counter movement, a reaction to that, scientific thinking started to develop. And people started to question these things. And that, I think, is a good thing. People should be questioning these things. And so they started to find out that you can measure the universe, like, and the Earth goes around the sun and not vice versa. They started to measure the stars. They started to be able to measure the age of the universe. And then they also started to resist against all these Christian religious notions of what the nature of reality should be. And so they started to form a belief that no, there is no divine creator because we can explain everything with science. Because we can measure everything, we can understand everything, so there's no need for a intelligent creator. There's no need for some sort of hyperactive micromanager up in the sky who is omniscient and omnipresent, but also kind of a dick, judging people. And I think this is very much from an emotional basis. This resistance came from, because these people, they were so fed up with these religious ideologies that they started to do the complete opposite. They were like, no, there is no God, and the universe is not made of Holy Spirits, it's purely matter. Point. Fact. Period. And emotionally speaking, this makes sense. Because if you're completely fed up with something, you want nothing to do with it. But scientifically speaking, it does not make sense. And this is the problem, because if we are just contemplating what is true and what is not, and which models of the universe are correct or are false, then we should not be so emotional about it. Which is also ironic, given that science is not supposed to be emotional at all. But in my opinion, it's these dogmas are emotional, because if you just think about them, there is no proof for some of these dogmas. So why believe them? So why be so convinced about them? And this, in my opinion, is, stems back these couple hundred years from this incredible reluctance and resistance that people felt against the oppressive ideologies and the oppressive dogmas from the church and from Christianity. Maybe other religions too, but I think all of this happened in Europe, which was predominantly Christian. So yeah, I think that's why these dogmas exist. That's why a lot of people are still dogmatic about them. And it's very ironic of me to say, but I do believe that science is, in this sense, religious. I think as long as there is any sort of dogma within science, it is religious, because that is a religious thing to do, to claim the absolute authority of the truth, and to not allow any sort of discussion or contention. And what I would want to see is the release of this of any dogma. Not even only within scientific thinking. I think dogma in itself is a very bad thing. I think people should always question things and always be open to always keep their mind open. So yeah, I hope that we will see this in the future. We will. I was just reading a book. It's very much this talk is very much inspired by this book. It's called The Science Delusion by Rupert Sheldrake, and it just talked about, for instance, the universal constants. So we have models of physics that are very accurate and very effective in being able to measure reality and to predict physical reality. And there are a lot of constants in these. There are universal constants in these formulas that pretty much kind of dictates the way that our very reality is formed, our physical world is formed. For instance, the gravitational constant is 6.67 times something. I don't know the exact number. And here's the thing. It has always been assumed that these constants are fixed. They're sort of embedded into the universe, and that they do not ever change. This also applies to like the speed of light, the gravitational constant, and there are others like the mass of the charge of an electron. And it's generally assumed that these constants are fixed forever, absolute, unchangeable, immutable, eternal, and in that sense almost godlike, because those are also the properties of God, like eternal, immutable, unchangeable, invincible. And in this is yet another way in which I think science is kind of religious, because it ascribes all these religious qualities to mathematics. So it's kind of like people, they were so fed up with religion that they created an anti-religion, which is science, but then they were also so habituated by religious thinking that they still applied religious thinking to this anti-religion that they created. Which is ironic and not necessarily correct in their ways of thinking. And so they assign these godlike qualities to mathematics to constants to physics, etc. Anyways, back to the point that I was making is that I saw, for instance, one research that tried to measure if the gravitational constant was actually constant. If it really was a fixed number that never changed. And so they measured it around the clock 24 hours a day with extremely precise measurements, and they found that it was fluctuating within a 24-hour period at the same frequency that the Earth was rotating around its own axis, 24 hours. And that was pretty fascinating to me, because I think it would be really cool if the gravitational constant was actually yet another formula. And to find out what does it depend on, and how does it fluctuate, if it does, of course. I mean, you would also need to be open-minded and to the fact that maybe these measurements were incorrect, and you might want to verify it with several more experiments. From what I read, it seemed credible, so I'm going to assume that there is at least some fluctuation in the gravitational constant. But yeah, I think that would be really cool to find out. Maybe we can, in the future, we'll have a formula for the gravitational constant. So yeah. I believe that I think science is a useful method, but once it becomes intertwined with dogmatic thinking, especially if that stems from a religious background, it becomes less useful, and it becomes more like a religious anti-religion. So I hope people can stay open-minded and go into the future open-mindedly. Cheers.